Mukbangs are popular here on YouTube because people can literally imagine everything about the food on camera and live through you. With event planning, you don't have the luxury of people sort of just looking at their screen and fantasizing. They're gonna get up close and personal with the food, and for that reason, there are a ton of opportunities to ruin someone's experience. And in this video, I wanna talk about a few of those. Hey, welcome back to the Experience Lab. I'm Joanna, your experience navigator, and on this channel, I share experiential tips for everyday brands. So like I said, in today's video, I want to break down the many ways that people experience food. And with event planning, it's easy to think, all right, the caterer is set up, the backdrop is behind the food, it looks good for the gram, check, moving on to the next thing. But it's not always like that. I'm gonna walk you through a couple of good practices to avoid that awkward upside down plate in the trash can, because we all know what that means. So the first one is appearance, and this one I'm sure you're probably pretty used to, especially in the world of events, because when it comes to event planning, presentation is everything. Now, thanks to the world of social media, people have the least trouble with the appearance of their food and putting it on display in a really fun, creative, beautiful way. Otherwise, people are gonna ask themselves in the back of their head, why does it look like that? And the minute they've asked that question, you've lost their trust. But the key is that your food also has to ladder up in a bunch of different other ways. One thing you want to remember is that as human beings, we eat every single day. And so just by first glance, it's really easy to tell whether something is hot, whether the food is cold, if it looks fresh, and a multitude of other things. And that even applies to drinks. When I was a bartender, as soon as I pulled out a beer out of the fridge or the cooler, the first thing people would look for is frosting and condensation on the bottle and say, oh, that doesn't look cold. Is it cold enough for me to drink? So again, appearance is everything when it comes to your food, and you need to make sure that if you're putting it on display and making it look grand, the flavor is laddering up, the temperatures are laddering up, and everything pretty much checks out. So the second thing is texture, and this is something that you are going to be really familiar with if you've ever gone out to buy food, or you've been a place where you pick something up and you expect it to be crunchy and it's soggy, or you pick up a cookie and expect it to be a crunchy cookie when it's a soft cookie. Things like potato chips, French fries, ice cream cones, all of those things, the texture has to ladder up. And so with this, it's a matter of making sure that your caterer is on top of the timing. If they're going to pre-scoop ice cream into the cones, making sure that the cones aren't going to get soggy and the ice cream isn't going to drip through the bottom, making sure that the potato chips are not stale, making sure that French fries are crunchy, or if that's not a preference, that you let people know. And that's a great thing to note for something like cookies that I mentioned before, because we've all had that experience of going to the supermarket, picking up a pack of cookies, getting home and expecting to bite into a soft, chewy cookie and it being crunchy. Another thing with texture is something that's supposed to be smooth, but then you taste it and it's lumpy. If it's dairy, that could mean that it's expired, and immediately people are going to be turned off. So let's say you have ice cream that has nuts in it. Again, that's a texture thing. That's something that you're going to want to let people know. And one of the last things that I can personally think of is meat, where the meat just looks really good when it's on display, but it's been out for a while, so it's no longer tender, it's no longer falling off the bone. And then when people bite into it, it's tough, it's difficult to chew, or there are a lot of fat pieces in it. It's just not a great experience. And because, again, we're human beings, if the food isn't good and I came expecting to leave full and happy, that could be a huge damper on my experience. And then when I go to leave a review or tell people about it, I'm gonna go, it was fun, but the food wasn't all that great. The next one I'm gonna talk about is probably the most unconventional when people think about food, and that is sound. If you've ever carried a bottle of soda or a bottle of sparkling water around long enough and opened it and closed it many times, you'll know somewhere along the way, you'll open it, you won't hear anything, and that's how you know that it's gone flat. The same thing goes for foods that are meant to be moist, like macaroni. Get your mind out of the gutter. But again, if you stick your fork into some macaroni and cheese and you expect it to have that classic sound and it's dry and the cheese is clumping up, people are not going to want it. This is also something that applies to tough bagels or bread or anything like that, and that's also a texture thing. Now this next one should go without saying, but flavor is huge. Imagine going to an event yourself and looking at the food display and you're like,
oh my God, that looks amazing.
You make a beeline to try it and then you bite into it, or you take a spoonful and you're like, something don't taste right. That sentence is a complete mood killer. You won't trust anything else in the venue and you're probably just gonna stick to water all night or something that's in a bottle, unless it's flat. And aside from being expired or tasting weird in any kind of way, just checking in with your caterer to make sure that something isn't too far to one end of the spectrum or the other, whether it be too salt or too sweet or, you know, anything in between, just making sure that the seasoning is up to par for what your guests are expecting. If and whenever you have the chance, make sure that you or your caterer or whoever is doing the cooking is sourcing local, fresh ingredients. Well, they don't have to be local, but fresh ingredients, because just like a texture can indicate that chips have gone stale, taste can indicate that other things have gone rancid or taste bad for a very particular reason. And last but not least, I thought I'd throw this in here, Aroma, which kind of encompasses a little bit of everything I've already talked about and sort of goes without saying. If something smells funny, people are not going to eat it or they're not going to trust it. And again, as the event organizer, you want people to trust your food because that's an extension of you, that's an extension of your brand, that's an extension of your overall experience that you're wanting to put together. So the next time you think about pre-pouring champagne, to do a champagne wall, or to preset for a toast, make sure that you chat through the timing with your team and or your caterer, your bartenders, etc. to make sure that the bubbles aren't gone before the last person gets their glass. Same thing if you're putting out ice cream, make sure it doesn't melt. And in reverse, if you're putting things like beer cans, bottles into the fridge, make sure that they have enough time to get cold. And the next time you think about doing a bagel wall or a donut wall where they're hanging on the little pegs for people to take off, just talk to your caterer and make sure that everything is going to stay fresh for as long as possible. Unless you're just doing it for the aesthetics or the pictures, which would be really wasteful, so that's not something that I recommend. And a little pro tip for your bar is to get cans of mixers instead of giant 2-liter bottles so that they stay fresh longer and your bartenders don't have to worry about people complaining that the soda is flat, the seltzer water is flat, or anything like that. Not to mention, it saves a lot of strain on their arms and shoulders from having to do this all night. Trust me, as a former bartender of 6 years, they will thank you so much for that very small gesture. Now, if you're working with a professional, they should already be thinking about these things, but the temptation is real to just get the food out to people, get them fed, and not think about whether or not it's going cold or anything like that. It's just really important to remember that all of these little tiny puzzle pieces are what come together to make your overall experience grand. And you want to make sure that your guest experience is seamless from end to end with 0 gaps. That's it for today's video. If you found it helpful, if you found it informative, make sure you give it a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any future videos from the Experience Lab. As always, I'm Joanna, this is the Experience Lab, and I will catch you in the next one.